Aisha Khan sat in the left-hand seat of Flight 907, her gloved fingers lightly brushing over the cold steel of the throttle levers. The hum of the Boeing 787 beneath her feet wasn't just an engine sound, it was a living rhythm, a pulse that she could feel in her bones. At only 22, she was the youngest co-pilot Skyreach Airlines had ever hired, a fact that made headlines and turned heads in the aviation world. Yet for Aisha, flying wasn't about fame, it was about freedom. Her journey to the cockpit had not been easy. She had grown up near an airbase where jets screamed overhead like thunderbirds. Her father, an aircraft mechanic, used to bring her broken radio parts and let her fix them while he worked on massive turbine engines. She learned early how to listen to the whine of metal, the hum of circuitry, the sigh of the wind as planes took off into clouds. When other children drew flowers, Aisha drew cockpits. When others talked about dance or dresses, she talked about drag coefficients and pitch angles. People laughed, but she didn't care. She knew where she belonged up there, above the world, where the sky had no ceiling. Now, sitting beside Captain Ray Donovan, a man whose reputation in Skyreach was legend, she felt both honored and terrified. The captain had flown everything from twin props to intercontinental jets. He had the calm demeanor of a man who had seen everything and survived it all. His white hair and sharp blue eyes spoke of decades spent between heaven and earth. Aisha had read about him during training. He'd once landed a failing aircraft in a snowstorm when every system had gone dark. To her, he was more than a mentor. He was proof that the sky respected courage. The first hour of the flight was textbook perfect. The engines purred smoothly, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, and passengers settled into their seats with blankets and quiet conversations. Aisha monitored the instruments, her eyes moving in a rhythm she had practiced for years: altimeter, fuel gauge, horizon indicator, repeat. Each number on the screen told her a story about the plane's health, and she read it like poetry. Captain Ray leaned back slightly and glanced at her. "Relax, Khan," he said with a faint smile. "You're doing great. Just remember, flying is like music. You feel it before you understand it?" She smiled nervously. "Music, huh? I'll try to keep it in tune," he chuckled. "You've got potential, Ghost Rider," her call sign. The one her instructor had given her back in flight school. It had started as a joke. During a late-night training session, when other cadets struggled to control turbulence during a storm simulation, Aisha had handled the aircraft with eerie calm. Her instructor, half impressed and half spooked, had muttered, "She flies like a ghost, silent, smooth, unstoppable. Ghost Rider suits her." The name stuck, and even now, hearing it from Captain Ray felt like a silent badge of honor. Outside the window, the horizon stretched like an endless ocean of dark blue. The sun dipped below the clouds, leaving streaks of crimson and gold that painted the fuselage. Aisha loved that moment, when day met night, when the earth below was hidden, and only the stars above kept company. In that solitude, she always felt closest to herself. She stole a glance at the captain. He was humming a tune under his breath, flipping through the flight log. There was a sense of ease about him, as if no storm could ever touch him. Aisha wished she could borrow a fraction of that confidence. She adjusted the trim slightly, noting a minor shift in wind speed. The captain noticed, nodded approvingly, and said nothing. That small gesture filled her with quiet pride. As the hours passed, they shared stories about flight mishaps, midnight landings, and the quiet beauty of watching cities flicker below like galaxies. Captain Ray talked about his early days, when navigation was done by stars and instinct rather than screens. "You kids have it easier now," he said with a laugh. "But never let the tech make you lazy. Feel the aircraft. It always tells you what it needs." Aisha nodded earnestly. "I'll remember that, sir." "You better," he said, his tone playful yet sincere. The sky has a way of testing those who forget. The words lingered in her mind, even as they shared coffee and light conversation. She watched the reflection of the instrument lights dance across his face and thought how strange it was. How fragile life felt up here, suspended between heaven and earth by engines, metal, and trust. Outside, clouds began to gather, soft wisps at first, innocent and harmless. The radar showed clear weather ahead, nothing to worry about. But Aisha had an instinct she could never explain. The air felt heavier, the horizon dimmer. A soft static hissed through the radio for a moment, then faded. She frowned and double-checked the instruments, but everything looked fine. Captain Ray noticed her unease. "Something wrong, Ghost Rider?" She hesitated. "No, sir, just feels different up here tonight," he smiled, reassuring as ever. "You'll learn soon enough. Sometimes the sky whispers before it speaks." "But don't worry, the whispers rarely bite." Aisha smiled faintly and leaned back. The hum of the engines continued like a lullaby, steady and strong. Passengers were asleep. Flight attendants quietly moved through the aisles, and the world below had vanished into darkness. It was one of those rare nights where the sky felt infinite and peaceful. But somewhere deep in the pit of her stomach, that strange feeling lingered, a quiet pulse of unease that she couldn't shake. She looked at the stars through the cockpit glass, the faint glimmer of constellations tracing ancient paths above. And then Captain Ray's words echoed again, softer this time, almost prophetic. "You've got potential, Ghost Rider." Aisha didn't know it then, but those would be the last calm words before the storm that would change everything. The clock on the cockpit panel ticked softly, marking 3 hours since takeoff. The night was quiet, almost too quiet, as Flight 907 sliced through the cold North Atlantic air at 35,000 feet. The hum of the twin Rolls-Royce engines had become a constant companion, a low mechanical heartbeat that soothed Aisha Khan into a rhythm of routine. She was reviewing flight parameters, sipping lukewarm coffee, when the radar screen blinked, a small, almost imperceptible flicker of red. At first, she thought it was a glitch. Radar interference over the Atlantic wasn't uncommon. The system often hiccuped when static built up in the atmosphere. But then, the red pulse spread wider, painting the calm blue grid with streaks of warning orange. "Captain," she said quietly, her voice breaking the steady hum of instruments. "You seeing that?" Captain Ray Donovan leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the display. That's odd. It wasn't there 10 seconds ago." He reached out, adjusted the radar gain and frowned. No storms reported in this sector. Before Aisha could respond, the aircraft jolted, once hard enough to make her coffee slosh across the console. Then again, stronger this time, thunk. The plane dropped sharply, and a murmur of panic rippled from the cabin behind them. "Severe turbulence," the captain announced into the intercom, his tone firm but calm. "Everyone remain seated. Cabin crew, secure yourselves." Aisha's heart rate spiked. Her hands automatically tightened around the yoke. The flight instruments began to dance, the altimeter flickering, the vertical speed indicator twitching wildly. "This isn't normal," she whispered. Ray didn't answer immediately. He was scanning the instruments, brow furrowed, his fingers moving with practiced precision. "You're right," he muttered. "It's not." The radar was now a blood-red smear, though there was no sign of storm clouds outside. The night sky remained deceptively clear, stars glimmering faintly above, the ocean below an invisible abyss. And then it happened. The aircraft lurched downward, a sudden violent drop that sent her stomach into her throat. Oxygen masks deployed from the ceiling with a hiss. The lights flickered. Someone screamed from the cabin. "Captain!" Aisha shouted. "Hold her steady, Ghost Rider!" Ray's voice was sharp, commanding. He grabbed the controls, but the aircraft wasn't responding the way it should. Every few seconds, the plane shuddered as though invisible hands were pushing it from every direction. Alarms erupted. Overspeed warnings, stall warnings, conflicting tones that made her ears ring. "What the hell is this?" Aisha gasped, glancing at the display. Ray's voice came through gritted teeth. "Air pocket collapse. It's rare and dangerous." An air pocket collapse. She remembered reading about it in training. A freak atmospheric void where rising and descending air currents collide, creating a sudden loss of lift. It could make even a massive aircraft feel like a leaf in a hurricane. "Altitude dropping fast," Aisha reported, trying to steady her breathing. "Pull back." "Counter the descent," Ray barked. She pulled the yoke toward her chest. The muscles in her arms burned with the effort, but the plane kept falling. The clouds blurred past the cockpit window as the altimeter spun downward. 30,000 feet. 28,000. 25,000. The captain flicked switches in rapid sequence. Anti-ice systems. Engine flow stabilizers, hydraulics override. His movements were mechanical, precise, born from years of instinct. Power to full thrust, he ordered. Aisha pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared in defiance, but the plane didn't climb. It continued its terrifying descent through invisible air. From the cabin came the muffled cries of passengers, the thuds of luggage striking the ceiling, and the metallic groan of stress along the fuselage. Every sound clawed at her nerves. "Ghost Rider!" The captain's shout snapped her focus back. "Forget the noise. Eyes on the horizon, focus," she did. Through the shaking glass, she saw nothing but a blur of darkness and lightning flickers on the far horizon. Her hands trembled, but she held on. She thought of all the times she'd practiced in the simulator, the calm, controlled environment, where mistakes didn't mean death. This wasn't that. This was chaos. "Captain, vertical speed, minus 3,000. She shouted. He grunted. "Compensate! Use trim." Her hands flew over the controls, adjusting pitch trim, balancing thrust distribution. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the descent began to slow. 24,000 feet, she said, voice shaking. "Good. Hold it there." But the turbulence had other plans. The aircraft rolled sharply to the left. Warnings blared. "Bank angle, pull up!" Aisha bit down on panic and turned the yoke hard right. The engines howled as the plane struggled to level. Sweat dripped down her temple. "Come on," she muttered. "Come on, baby, hold together." For a few terrifying seconds, it felt like the world was made of noise, alarms, wind, and the shrill cries of the dying storm. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the shaking eased. The aircraft leveled slightly, though it still trembled in protest. "Altitude, 22,000, she said, exhaling shakily. Ray looked at her, his face pale under the dim cockpit lights. "You did good, Ghost Rider. Keep her steady. We might be through the worst." But his eyes betrayed him. They were scanning the controls, reading something she couldn't yet see. The hydraulic pressure was dipping. The left engine temperature was rising abnormally fast. Aisha followed his gaze and felt the cold sting of dread. "Sir, engine 2, overheating," Ray cursed under his breath. "We took a lightning hit, I think. Power flow's unstable." She turned her head toward the left wing, straining to see through the window. For a split second, she caught a flicker of orange, a faint glow near the engine's edge. Her heart dropped. "Fire? Could be residual heat. Could be worse," Ray said. "We'll shut it down if the sensors confirm." The intercom crackled to life. The flight attendant's panicked voice filled the cockpit. "Captain, we have people injured back here. Oxygen masks deployed and—" "Secure everyone," Ray interrupted, his tone firm but kind. "We're stabilizing. Sit tight." He cut the transmission and looked at Aisha. "All right, Ghost Rider. I need you to keep this bird alive while I handle the systems. You ready?" She swallowed hard, nodding. "Ready. Good. Remember what I told you. Feel the plane. Don't fight her. Guide her." Her trembling fingers tightened on the yoke. The radar still glowed faintly red, but the violent shaking had lessened. Somewhere in the chaos, she felt something shift inside her. Fear turning into fierce focus. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a dream. This was the real test. One that would decide whether 211 souls lived or died. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Steadying her breath, then whispered to herself, barely audible over the hum of the wounded engines, "Hold together. Ghost Rider, just hold together." And the storm, as if it heard her, waited, ready to strike again. Lightning tore through the sky like a blade, splitting the darkness into blinding white for half a heartbeat. Then came the sound, a deep, rolling boom that shook the aircraft to its bones. Flight 907 lurched violently, and Aisha Khan's headset nearly slipped off as the cockpit lights flickered madly. The left engine indicator went from yellow to red, and the shrill alarm of a system failure filled the air. Engine 2 struck. Damaged. Aisha shouted over the chaos, her voice cracking. Captain Ray Donovan was already reaching for the emergency checklist, his face lit by the harsh red glow of warning lights. "Shut down protocol, quick," he ordered, his voice tense but steady. He had seen many storms, many emergencies, but this one was different. The air outside wasn't just turbulent, it was angry, alive, as if nature itself was clawing at the wings. Aisha's fingers flew across the switches. Fuel cutoff engaged. Hydraulic bypass online. Temperatures spiking fast. Fire suppression active, Ray confirmed, hitting the guarded button on his side. A deep thud echoed through the fuselage as the extinguisher system kicked in. For a moment, the cockpit filled with smoke, acrid, choking. Aisha coughed hard, eyes watering. "Smoke in the cockpit," she said through clenched teeth. "We need ventilation." Ray toggled the purge valve, coughing violently. "It'll clear in a second." "Keep her level, Ghost Rider." Her vision blurred, but she focused on the horizon indicator. The aircraft was dipping left again, the dead engine creating drag. She counted instinctively, her hands firm on the yoke despite the tremors in her fingers. Outside, lightning danced around the wings and the rain slammed against the windshield so hard it sounded like gravel. The altimeter wavered at 24,000 feet. They had survived the initial collapse, but now they were flying on one struggling engine through one of the most unpredictable storm cells in the world. The radio crackled with static. She tried to raise air traffic control, but only broken syllables came through.
"Skyreach 9!
7, come in." "Can't get through," she said. "Signal's down." Ray didn't respond immediately. She glanced over, and that's when she saw him. His right hand had frozen mid-reach toward the panel, his eyes glazed for a fraction of a second. "Captain?" He blinked, tried to say something, but his breath hitched. One hand went to his chest, clutching hard. "Captain!" Aisha shouted. "Talk to me, please." He leaned back in his seat, his face contorted in pain. The color drained from his skin. The checklist fell from his trembling hand, paper fluttering to the floor. Aisha's heart stopped. "Oh God, no." She grabbed the control column with one hand, reaching toward him with the other. "Ray, you're having a heart attack. Stay with me." "Please!" he gasped, his breaths ragged and shallow. "It's okay," he managed to whisper, forcing a weak smile. "Focus on the plane. Don't let her fall!" Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded fiercely. "I won't, I promise." She steadied the aircraft again, fighting the shaking and the alarms, her every movement mechanical, instinctive. Her body knew what to do, even as her mind screamed in panic. The storm roared outside, wind battering the fuselage like fists on a coffin. Ray coughed violently, his breaths growing shorter. "Listen to me," he said hoarsely. "Listen, Ghost Rider." Aisha turned to him, terrified. "Don't talk, sir. I'll get you oxygen." But he shook his head weakly. "No, listen. You're ready." "You always were," her throat tightened. "No, I'm not. I can't do this alone." He gave a faint smile, his eyes dimming. "Yeah, you can." "You already are." Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face, pale, exhausted, yet strangely peaceful. His hand reached out, trembling, and rested on hers atop the throttle. The heat of his touch lingered even through the gloves. "You..." he breathed out, his voice barely audible over the storm. "You're Ghost Rider now," her eyes widened. "Captain, bring them home." And then his hand slipped away. His chest stopped moving. The cockpit fell silent except for the shriek of the wind and the steady tone of a flatline in her mind. For a long, shattering moment, Aisha couldn't move. She just sat there, the weight of what had just happened pressing down like gravity itself. Her mentor, the man who had believed in her when no one else did, was gone. The man who had taught her to feel the sky, not fight it, was gone. "Captain?" she whispered again, even though she knew there would be no answer. Her vision swam with tears, but the alarms snapped her back to reality. Engine temperature rising, cabin pressure unstable, altitude dropping. Her grief was forced into the background by instinct and training. She straightened in her seat, wiped her eyes roughly, and took a deep breath. The storm wasn't done, and 2 one-on-one lives depended on her now. The voice recorder was still running. She pressed the transmit button on her headset. "This is Skyreach 907, Captain Incapacitated." I repeat, Captain Incapacitated. "Co-pilot assuming command," static answered her. The signal still wasn't breaking through. She was alone, completely, utterly alone at 35,000 feet, somewhere over the North Atlantic. She stared at the controls, every warning light glowing like red stars. The weight of command felt like a physical thing pressing against her chest. Her trembling fingers found the throttle, the same one the captain had touched. His last warmth seemed to linger there, like a fading memory. "Bring them home," she whispered, repeating his final words. Lightning flared outside again, and the sound of thunder rolled over the fuselage like a giant's heartbeat. The left engine sputtered, the right one groaned. and the aircraft began to sway in the crosswind. Aisha's breathing slowed. The fear was still there, a living thing crawling up her spine, but beneath it was something else. Focus, determination. She adjusted the pitch trim, stabilized the roll, and brought the nose level. "Okay, Ghost Rider," she muttered to herself. "It's just you now. Time to prove him right." Her hands moved across the controls, firm and deliberate. The sky outside was a battlefield of thunder and flame, but inside the cockpit, something had changed. The trembling stopped. The fear melted away, replaced by a quiet, burning resolve. And in that storm-lit cockpit, with lightning painting the clouds and rain screaming against the windshield, Aisha Khan, the rookie co-pilot, took command of a wounded jet, carrying 211 souls through the rage of the sky. Somewhere above the thunder, she could almost hear Captain Ray's voice, faint and steady in her memory. "You're Ghost Rider now. Bring them home." And with that, she pushed the throttles forward and faced the storm alone. The cockpit smelled faintly of burnt insulation and smoke. The steady hum of the right engine was the only reminder that Flight 907 was still alive. Aisha Khan sat rigid in her seat, hands trembling over the controls, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Captain Ray Donovan's lifeless body rested beside her, his headset hanging loosely around his neck. She didn't have time to cry, didn't have the luxury of grief. The only thing that mattered now were the 211 souls behind her, and the promise she'd made with her mentor's final breath. She took a shaky inhale and spoke into the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Skyreach 907, Captain incapacitated. One engine failure. Request immediate assistance," Static hissed in response. For a terrifying moment, she thought the communication system was still dead. Then, through the static, a voice broke through, faint but clear. "Skyreach 907, this is Gander Control. We read you, Ghost Rider. Confirm single pilot operations?" Hearing her old call sign over the radio hit her like a spark in the dark. "Affirmative," she replied, forcing strength into her voice. "Co-pilot assuming command. Single pilot ops. Engine 2 shut down. Hydraulic systems rerouted. Cabin secured." There was a pause. Then the voice returned, calmer now, professional but laced with awe. "Copy that, Ghost Rider. You're doing great. We're with you all the way. Nearest diversion is Heathrow, runway 30 left. You can make it." Aisha glanced at the dead instruments on her left and nodded to no one. "Copy, Gander. Ghost Rider en route to Heathrow." Her fingers moved across the panels, rerouting secondary hydraulics and balancing the thrust differential. Each motion came from memory, hours of simulation drills and training sessions, all now distilled into instinct. The left engine's fire indicators were stable, the smoke had cleared, and the emergency lighting bathed the cockpit in a soft red glow. She looked out through the windshield. The sky was a furious mix of clouds and fading storm, but beyond that chaos, far on the horizon, the first faint light of dawn began to spread across the ocean, a soft orange line that stretched forever. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Captain," she whispered, glancing at his still form beside her. "We're almost through." The next 2 hours felt like days. The storm eased, but the aircraft was still wounded. The left side hydraulics were barely responsive, forcing her to steer with uneven control. Every adjustment of the yoke sent shudders through the fuselage. She flew by instinct, her body reading the aircraft's movements more than her instruments could tell her. Behind her, the passengers sat in stunned silence. Some were praying, others crying softly. The cabin crew had done everything they could to calm them, whispering reassurances they didn't fully believe themselves. But every few minutes, someone would look out the window and see the young woman in the cockpit, her silhouette framed against flashes of lightning. And somehow, that gave them hope. Aisha's voice came through the intercom, calm but steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. The captain is unwell, but the situation is under control. We are on course for an emergency landing at Heathrow. Please remain seated and trust that we will bring you home safely." There was silence for a moment, and then, faintly, a ripple of applause from the cabin. She smiled for the first time in hours. It was small, tired, but real. "For you, Captain," she whispered again. By the time she reached British airspace, the sun had fully risen. The clouds began to thin, revealing the soft blue of early morning. Control towers across the Atlantic had already relayed her signal. Heathrow was waiting. Ghost Rider, you are cleared for final approach. Emergency crews are standing by. The controller's voice came through, calm but reverent. You're doing incredible, ma'am. She exhaled slowly, every nerve alive. Roger that. Final approach in sight. The runway lights of Heathrow shimmered in the distance, bright against the soft dawn. For a second, it didn't feel real. After everything, the lightning, the smoke, the silence of loss, it felt like a dream. But as the altimeter ticked down and the city's skyline came into view, reality struck. She was almost home. Her hands tightened on the yoke. All right, Ghost Rider, she murmured to herself, echoing Ray's voice in her memory. Feel the aircraft. Don't fight her. Guide her. She adjusted the flaps, lowered the landing gear. The warning lights blinked angrily, hydraulic pressure low, but the mechanisms locked into place with a reassuring clunk. The engines roared as she trimmed power to steady descent. The runway grew larger, closer, almost within reach. The wind buffeted her as she aligned the nose perfectly with the center line. You can do this, she whispered. You will do this. Then softly, almost like a prayer. For you, Captain. The main landing gear struck the runway with a heavy thud. The aircraft bounced once, then settled, tires screeching against asphalt. Sparks danced beneath the left wing where metal scraped concrete. The cabin shook, alarms blaring again, but she held steady, reverse thrust engaged, brakes locked, nose down. The aircraft slowed. The storm was gone. The moment the wheels stopped rolling, Aisha let go of the yoke and leaned back, her entire body trembling. Her chest rose and fell with sharp, uneven breaths. It was over. Against every odd, every fear, she had brought them home. Skyreach 907, runway cleared. Ground crews on site, came the radio. Welcome home, Ghost Rider. She turned her head toward the captain's seat. For the first time since the storm began, she allowed herself to cry. Not out of fear, but out of relief, grief, and pride all at once. She reached over, gently placing her hand over his. You did it, Captain, she whispered through tears. We did it. When the cabin doors opened minutes later, applause erupted. Passengers sobbed, hugged, and clapped for the young woman who had brought them back from the edge of the sky. Reporters would later call it the Ghost Rider flight, a miracle in the clouds. But for Aisha Khan, it wasn't about headlines or fame. It was about a promise, a bond between a teacher and his student, between courage and fear, between life and the endless, beautiful sky. As the dawn light spilled through the cockpit windows, she wiped her tears and looked out one last time at the horizon she had conquered. The clouds had cleared, and the sun glowed warm and golden over the wings of her plane. Ghost Rider, she whispered softly, a smile breaking through her exhaustion. Mission complete. And in that moment, as the world below celebrated and the sky above opened its arms once more, Aisha Khan wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was everything her captain had seen in her. Ghost Rider, the girl who brought the sky back to life.